Welcome to Our Last Meal, the podcast on grief, loss, and food. I'm your host, Andrew, and every episode I talk with a guest about someone important in their life that they've lost and what role food played in their relationship. I want to apologize up top because the audio may be a little spotty at the beginning and the end this week. I'm on vacation in Miami. I've been posting a lot about it on social media, on Instagram, and I'll have more next week in a mini-sode. Just a heads up there. The audio of the conversation this week is the normal quality that you would expect, but I do just want to apologize up top. This week I'm going to be talking with author and host of the podcast, Fascinating People, Fascinating Places, Dan Mainwaring, about a close friend, travel, food, and loss. We talked about his travels across Europe, growing apart, and goulash. And I really enjoyed this chance to talk. I do like to give a warning up top, though, that the podcast does touch on sensitive topics such as grief and loss. So just with that said, please be mindful as you listen. Hello and welcome to Our Last Meal, the podcast that talks about grief, loss, and food. I'm your host, Andrew, and my guest this week is author and podcaster Dan Mainwaring. Dan, thanks for being here.
It's a great privilege to be here, Andrew.
Awesome. I'm glad to have you here. I know we've been chatting back and forth a little bit about getting you on the show, so I'm glad we have time to sit down today and talk and just go into our topic.
Sorry, just give me 1 sec.
No worries.
Sorry, my dog just burst in the room suddenly and disrupted my recording. So I apologize for that lack of professionalism.
No, I promise you that's fine. I've got 2 cats and a 5-year-old downstairs, so I'm kind of surprised I haven't had anybody bust in yet, so no worries.
Yeah, I saw the other day on TV, there was a lady on, I think it was MSNBC, and she was getting interviewed, and her husband walked behind her just wearing his Y-fronts on national TV. So I guess even at the top of the pile, people have these little mishaps.
Yeah. I was gonna start us back over, but I think we'll go with it. Let's just take, if that's not the energy that we bring into today, why are we here?
Right, exactly.
Now, I know we were talking before we started recording just about the heat. You said you had it about 100 there, and it's about 93 here. For the audience, remind me, you're living in Kansas City, correct?
Yeah, correct. Kansas City, right in the middle of the country.
Oh God, and so I've never been to Kansas City. When I think Kansas City, I think barbecue, and apparently now I'm going to have to think about heat waves as well.
Yeah, it's weird here because I'm from England, and over there we have the 4 seasons. They have the same thing here, but just each one is to the extreme. So summer is 110 degrees, winter is 12 inches of snow every day, spring showers are tornadoes, and the fall it's just windy. I mean, it blows down all the leaves, blows down all the people. So, I mean, it has that same pattern, but it's just to the extreme.
Everything's dialed up to 11.
Exactly.
So now you mentioned, you're from England. What part of England are you from, and then how long have you been in the States?
So I'm from Hertfordshire, which is it's just outside London, really. I don't know if you watch soccer, football, but Tottenham Hotspur Football Club are in London, but they're technically in Hertfordshire, so it's kind of on the periphery of London. And I've been in the States now for about 20 years.
That's okay. Well, I got to deconstruct a few things here because I don't follow soccer much. I have to admit, but my wife is an avid soccer fan. More so when she was younger, but the Hotspurs were always her English team whenever she was growing up. She was always a Hotspurs fan.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She told me she always liked them because they're kind of a scrappy team. They weren't as maybe not as well regarded as say Manchester United.
Right.
But that was always her team that she would pull for and love to see them do well.
Well, it's funny because I actually grew up near there, but I do not support them. I support I support Everton, which is about 200 miles up north. And the reason for that is I went to Catholic school, and we had this elderly chaplain, and before we learned to read and write, we learned we had to support Everton. And so now, 40 years later, there's a whole bunch of my friends from primary school, and all of us are still Everton fans. I actually went to a Everton game 3 days ago in Minnesota. They came over. So I don't know how good he was at getting everyone to be Catholic, but he was very effective at getting us to support Everton.
You have to wonder at the end of the day, if he was like, well, a lot of them they turned away from the church, but I mean they still support the team, so I did
Right,
something right.
right, exactly. Yeah.
So okay, so being here in the states, living in Kansas City, I have to ask. Now, are you a fan of American football? And if so, are the Chiefs your team, or do you pull for another team that's 200 miles away?
So as far as American football goes, my wife is from Florida, well, Alabama. She was born, so I kind of got exposed to that when we first moved here. We lived in Alabama and then Florida, so I got into the college football for years. But down there, nobody really watched the NFL much. So it's only really I came here that it was more on my radar. I don't especially get passionate about it. But at the same time, it's been exciting here the last few years. I mean, actually, since we came to Kansas City, first the soccer team won the MLS, then we had the baseball team won the World Series, and then obviously the Chiefs. So you kind of get caught up in the bandwagon type thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I support them now. But if they suddenly turned bad, I wouldn't be one of those hardcore tailgaters down there talking about the good old days. I would just be watching English soccer instead.
That's fair. I can understand if it's not something you grew up with. And this isn't just true of American football. I'd say this would be true of most sports or just events, things like that. I mean, if it's not something you grew up with, I'm sure it's hard to be quite as passionate about. But that being said, just being in the environment, especially when like the teams are doing well, there's something really captivating that just kind of pulls you in. That just makes it easy to, to get excited.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the excitement. People treat each other a little bit nicer. People are friendly. You go into the store and people are
Yeah.
talking about it. It just kind of gives you this good kind of feel good factor in the community. So, as much as the football, it just kind of brings everyone together, which is nice. A lot of times, I mean, Kansas City's not huge, but it's a decent sized city. A lot of times, you can feel pretty isolated, but when you have something like that going on, suddenly it does have much more of a community feel. So it's nice.
Yeah. Sports really can be that kind of I don't know if I'd say great equalizer, but that thing that can bring people from different backgrounds together. One of the things that I love, and I've kind of gotten my wife and my daughter into is professional wrestling, and it's one of those things I'll tell anyone. It is incredibly cheesy, but whenever you kind of get past the cheesiness and just accept it for the theater that it is, it can be a lot of fun. And the shows that we've been to as a family, we've seen that you have people from all backgrounds, all walks of life, and they're just all there to have a good time and, just see some corniness and have a little fun.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because when I was younger, actually, my friend, who I'm probably going to talk about later, he was really into the wrestling. So I used to watch that a lot too. This was back when they had the Hart Foundation and then the British
Oh yeah.
Bulldog, and then on the other side you had Steve Austin and you had the kind of America versus the rest of the world type dynamic. So, I supported the Hart Foundation and the Canadians and the British Bulldog. Um, and then it just after Owen Hart died, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really sad. He died. And then you had Brian Pillman died. Brett left, obviously. And I don't know. I kind of stopped following it after that, to be honest. But I mean, I occasionally still watch it just for a laugh.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I remember, I think it was just before the Attitude Era, and this is going to be very polarizing, I'm sure, for some listeners. Wrestling talk is probably not the thing that most people show up here for, but I remember that was just before the Attitude Era really kicked off. But yeah, you know, I remember the whole Hart Foundation versus United States and that being the big deal. I always loved Bret Hart though, and to this day he's still one of my all time favorites. But there is an old photo that I've seen that was a picture of Bret Hart and the Hart Foundation. And for anyone who's not familiar with it, Bret Hart he's one of his tagline was always the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be, and very much true. He was just incredible at what he did. But he was surrounded by a lot of his family members. To your point, Brian Pillman, who passed away, Owen Hart, who died in a horrible event, Davy Boy Smith, the British Bulldog, he passed away in early 2000s, and then Jim the Anvil Neidhart just passed away a few years ago. So Brett is this figure who was incredibly, you know, just talented and just so influential to even modern day guys. and he was surrounded by so much loss. It's really, it always breaks my heart whenever I think about, just how much he's been through on a personal level, as part of that. But it also makes me really appreciative of him as a, who he was in a performer.
Yeah, I mean, it is really sad because none of these guys were old either. I mean, they were all pretty young. I mean, especially Owen. I mean, he was really young and he had young kids. I mean, that actually happened here in Kansas City before I
Yeah,
moved here, obviously. But yeah, I
yeah.
mean, it's awful to, like you said, you just look at a picture like that and just think of all the loss. It's terrible.
And to think that he's still today, he's had health issues in the last couple of years, but I know from what I've seen, I'd say no, I don't know firsthand, but it seems like he's in a better place now. But still, there's a lot of I'm sure there's a lot of heartache there, just because it's one of those things. Time, they're the saying that time heals all wounds. There's certain things I don't think that they get better necessarily, or that they don't get perfect. They may get a little bit better over time, but there's always still going to be some pain there, I'm sure.
For sure. And also, I think, most of us have some kind of separation from personal life and work life. But I mean, for
Yeah.
him, it's one and the same, So I don't imagine there's a period on his life he can look back on without thinking about those people.
Yeah, that's very true. That's got to make it even more difficult. Something that you were passionate about, and then your family intertwined with that, and your family, of course, is important to you. And there's just so much, um, I'll say complexity there. I'm sure because you have to think that some of those had to have been some of the best times of his life. Because I know he worked with his brother Owen. They worked as a team. They
Mhm.
feuded with one another and wrestled against one another. And I think there's got to be a certain level of camaraderie of you've got a chance to put on an amazing show with your brother.
Right.
um, so there's got to be a lot of complex feelings there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I didn't bring you on to talk about wrestling, although that is a nice surprise. And I am honestly, surprisingly enough, wearing my Cactus Jack shirt today. Mick Foley,
That's
one
funny.
of the all-time greats as
Yeah,
well.
he was.
Um, but yeah, so I brought you on to talk about the podcast is Our Last Meal. It's loss, grief, and food. And I always try to to tell people the whole concept is we lose people in our lives. Sometimes it's a relationship just ending. Sometimes it's a friendship ending. It's a person passing away. It could be friends, could be family. um, and it's a natural part of life, but I think a lot of times we don't have an opportunity when we lose someone to really truly grieve. I think the instance is death. If you lose somebody to death, I mean, there's always this feeling of people wanting to comfort you, but it's only so far. We don't really get a chance to be, asked, tell me about the person that you lost, tell me about this person you cared about. So the whole goal here is to try to give people that space to, to tell their story about the individual that was close to them, and to, you know, talk about them and kind of celebrate them, but also talk about how it relates back to food, because I really do feel that food is a really powerful connector for people. Um, so who are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so it's one of my, well, at the time he was my best mate, Deacon, and we had met at school when we were 11, and there was kind of a group of us. But over time it sort of kind of whittled down a little bit. So by the time we finished high school to go to college, um, people didn't go to college in the same level as they do now. 20 years ago in England, it was maybe 20% of us went to college. So it wasn't like everybody goes like now here. And it
Yeah,
just happened that, with grades and finances, he didn't go to college. The rest of us did. And so, it didn't create a wedge between us, but it obviously you have different life experiences because
yeah,
we're off at college, clubbing, all this stuff. He's living at home with his parents. He had an okay job, but it paid really poorly, so he couldn't really afford to, get out. And so, anyway, he's the one that I wanted to talk about. And it does. Food is definitely a factor in those
yeah,
memories. Um, Specifically, when I was in college, he and I reconnected and we took a trip. I had this harebrained scheme. I had a friend in Romania who I'd met in France, and I contacted the guy. I said, "Hey, can we come and visit you?" And he said, "Yeah, great, come over." So at the time, you couldn't even fly directly there because it wasn't communist anymore. It was about 5 years later, but
Yeah.
Romania, it was still run by communists, and it was still pretty insular.
Yeah.
So the plan was we had to fly to Budapest, Hungary, and then get a train. Well, basically, we got to Budapest, Hungary. I called my friend up, said, "Hey, we'll be there tomorrow." And he suddenly said, "Oh, well, my dad's worried about having Westerners coming here because he thinks, the police might listen in. So, in actual fact, you can't come."
So he waited until you got off of the flight to tell you that the offer is rescinded.
Right. So suddenly it's like we have 2 weeks before our flight back home from Hungary, and we have nowhere to stay. And, we budgeted thinking we had accommodation, and we budgeted thinking we're going to Romania, which was super cheap, versus Hungary, which was not as cheap.
Yeah.
So my friend wasn't that pleased, obviously, when I told him what was going
Of course.
on. And so we had that initial few minutes of panic, and we wandered around the streets of Budapest thinking, what the heck are we going to do, And
Yeah.
eventually we wandered into this little restaurant. We were the only people there, but the only thing they had on the dish was goulash, which I'd never had before. But, it's kind of a stewy type thing with kind of like pasta type stuff,
Yeah, I was gonna say, so I've heard of goulash but never tried it. Could you? So you said it's kind of a pasta stew kind of combination.
Yeah, so the actual goulash, it's kind of stew with, like beef in it, but they put a ton of paprika in it. That's the main thing, I think, that marks it out. Like in Hungary, they love paprika. They put paprika on their toothbrush pretty much. I mean, it's just like everything's paprika. So that's what was on the menu, the only thing on the menu. And so we had that, and we really liked it. But also, I just remember that meal specifically because, frankly, we were on the verge of a nervous breakdown at that point. But by the time we finished it, we had just kind of decided to embrace the situation and make the best of it. And short term, what we decided to do was we realized it was too expensive to get a hotel, but it was cheaper if we just got trains to other countries and slept on them overnight and then went to the other country for a day and then went, on to the next place. So that was our plan.
That is the kind of flexibility I think you can only have at that age. That
right.
There is never another time in your life where you can be that flexible to go from we have nowhere to sleep for the next 2 weeks to let's just ride trains from country to country.
Right, exactly. And I mean, this was at that point in time, internet access was like internet cafes. So it wasn't like you had your cell phone and stuff. You could just look things up. So we were kind of going in blindly, but we just went to the train station and there happened to be a train leaving overnight going to Zagreb, Croatia. So we're like, great, let's just get on this train. And we ended up in Croatia, and just bad luck. It happened to be some time of year where there was all these huge festivals going on. So it was just like a chaos, madhouse, packed streets, packed restaurants. You couldn't really get anywhere. You couldn't really see anything. So we decided, well, let's just get like a snack from a convenience store. And this was the second meal of the trip. Just bought a Snickers bar, right? And this was like 1995. It was $10.
$10.
$10 for a Snickers, right? So now we're thinking like, holy shit, if it's like $10 for a Snickers, like imagine getting a plate of goulash in this country,
Yeah.
So we decided to cut that short, and unfortunately there weren't any trains, so we had to sleep in the station, which was illegal. So we had to take shifts, one of us watching every time the police came around to try and arrest us for being homeless. And the next day we got a train, took us to Slovakia, Bratislava. And this is the third meal we had, which I vividly remember. We went into this restaurant and sat down. They didn't even ask us what we wanted or anything. They just kept bringing us stuff. and bought us like, chicken, and then they kept bringing us these massive beers, like you get in Germany at, sort of Oktoberfest.
Giant ones.
Yeah, and we kept saying like, no, 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 and they couldn't speak any English. We couldn't speak any Slovak, but they just kept on bringing us stuff, and if we wouldn't eat it, they'd be insulted. And so we're freaking out, thinking, oh my god, it was like $10 for a Snickers bar in Croatia. I mean, this is probably going to cost us like $1,000 or something, which we don't have. But eventually, we finally got them to. We're almost at the point of vomiting from overeating and drinking. They finally sort of relented and gave us the bill, and it was like 50 cents. It was ridiculous. I'm like, I mean, it was just, how do you go? I mean, each country is different, but just that variance from one East European country to another. It was.
So I mean, that price, you couldn't get a bite of a Snickers bar in Croatia for that, right?
Right, and I mean, honestly, it was probably the best meal I've ever had. I mean, because it was like about 5 courses and like unlimited beer, and so yeah, that was the high point of the trip, definitely.
No, now you said the best meal you've ever had. Let me ask you, when you think back on it, if you think about meals you've had in your life, and if that ranks up there as the best, would you say it was because of the quality of food, the circumstances of just you're on this crazy adventure? Was it the company? What do you think it was that makes that the best?
I think it was all those things, because it was really good food. I mean, it was like really good. The
Yeah,
chicken, and they gave us this kind of veal and stuff like that. But yeah, hanging out with my friend, and then just the circumstances, because 2 nights before we're kind of freaking out, like, what the heck are we gonna eat and drink and do for the next 2 weeks? And then suddenly it's like we're being treated like kings by these very hospitable people. And even when we left there, we wanted to get a bus back to the train station, and by that time we figured their money was pretty cheap compared to ours, so we weren't worried about money. But some random stranger insisted on buying us bus tickets and stuff. So I think just the
really.
whole vibe, it was like we just happened upon the nicest people in the whole world, who happened to have this fantastic restaurant, and it happened to come at a point in time when we were both at a real low. So just
Yeah,
all those things together, you just kind of swung the pendulum from sort of panic to jubilation.
yeah, and it does feel like there are times in life whenever it almost feels like you just kind of fall backwards into just this lucky situation, and it almost, there are times like it almost seems like, okay, this feels too good to be true. It's just the way
Right.
everything's lining up. It feels like that. It sounds like that's what it was, the feeling like.
It was basically, yeah. And then we we lucked out again as well after that, because we pulled the old train trick again, right? Went overnight to Poland and Krakow, and we were
As
wandering
you
around,
do.
right, and we were wandering around Krakow looking for a restaurant, and there was this big kind of brick building, and it had these doors open, and we looked inside, and there was just all these people sitting at endless banks of wooden tables, kind of like in a Munich beer house or something,
Yeah.
eating this roast chicken. We thought, looks pretty good, so we just sort of we walked in, and we got in line behind all these people, and most of them were wearing overalls and stuff. So we thought,
Yeah.
maybe the local factory workers come here to get lunch or something. So we're waiting in line, and everyone's kind of looking at us a bit weird. It's like, well, it's not a lot of tourists here. Probably they haven't seen English people before. And we got our food, and then I tried to give the lady the money for the food, and she just seemed really confused, and there didn't seem to be any prices or anything, and she just sort of shooed me away. So I thought, okay, maybe they just come around and bill you at the table, when you finished. So we
Yeah.
sat at this table among all these people in their overalls and had this meal, and everyone's looking at us, and finally this alarm went off, and everyone around us suddenly got up and cleared their plates, and at the back of the hall they opened this big metal sliding door, and on the other side is like a factory. And we realized this was like the canteen for the factory workers, and I guess they had like free lunch for them. We had just slipped into this inadvertently, and stolen their food pretty much. And the whole time they're just thinking, who the hell are these guys that just have the audacity to just blunder into our factory and eat our food? But again, it was like really, it was really good food. You know?
I I'm just picturing just the idea of being at work one day. I think just now, like if I were working in my office and all of a sudden just two random guys from these streets just came in and grabbed a plate and sat down beside me and some coworkers, and I love it.
Yeah, it was one of those things. It was like, I mean, once we realized, obviously, it's really embarrassing. But luckily, other than us, everyone had quickly packed up and gone back to work. So there wasn't really anyone around to look at us when we realized our mistake. But yeah,
You gave at least a few people that day. You gave them a new stereotype for English people. Like, you got to watch English people because they'll just come to eat at your office for no reason.
right, exactly. They just sort of bust in and take your food. It's just no manners at all. So yeah, that was so. I vividly remember all of those meals, because it just seemed like the whole trip was just based around food, in terms of, because half the time we were just hungry. But
Well, I guess that makes sense because I mean, I guess when you normally travel, I mean, to me, one of the things I get most excited about is having a chance to just eat new places and try new food. You know, that's in a best case scenario, but it seems like in this situation, it was literally we have to be able to eat for the next 2 weeks. We have to be able to survive, and so it almost sounds like that was like kind of a constant. Okay, we need to understand where our next meal is coming from.
yeah, I mean, we really did. To be honest, the last 2 days we came down to the wire, and we used our last money. We bought this big round loaf of bread and this can of Bulgarian luncheon meat, which once we opened it, we realized they had like green fungus growing inside.
Oh
So
God.
we didn't eat that, but I had some licorice, all sorts, that I bought for the trip and hadn't eaten, and they'd melted into one kind of big lump in the heat. But the
Yeah.
last 2 days, we had licorice, all sorts sandwiches on stale bread, which, I mean, at the time it was edible. I mean, the bread was hard. You really had to kind of chew on it to get any to get any movement. But you do what you have to do, right?
Yeah. I'm sure you can look back now, and it's one of those things you can look back now and kind of laugh at the absurdity of it. But
Right. Well, yeah, it's funny. After that, none of my other friends ever wanted to go on a trip with me, which is completely understandable.
well, in your defense though, you weren't the one that canceled the
Yeah.
the stay. I mean, you just had to make do with the best you could.
Right. Yeah, that's true. But yeah, it was.
So,
Yeah, I mean,
go
it was
ahead.
a crazy trip. I mean, it really was. And like I say, the food was central to it. And I just think also it's one of those trips too where even though you're friends with someone, you get a kind of deeper level of friendship just through enduring some sort of challenges. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, did you feel, I know you said that you were both kind of it sounds like you were both at different points in your life. I mean, even at the same age, you both had different, kind of paths that you had started down. A trip like this, did you feel like at the end of it, or did he feel like at the end of it, did it bring you closer? Did it kind of highlight the differences? How did you feel coming out of it?
Well, we sort of ran the full gamut, to be honest with you, because there were points in time where we had arguments because, we were stressed out and coming up with these
Of
crazy
course.
ideas and we didn't always agree. So, we had arguments, but then at other points in time, we were getting along great and, just laughing hilariously at our predicaments. And, you know, um, so it was, you kind of have more experiences, both positive and negative, but overall it made you feel more connected, if that makes sense.
You I guess you bonded through hardship is what it sounds
Right.
like.
Yeah, exactly. But
That that does make sense.
yeah, but unfortunately, once we came back, our kind of separate paths accelerated pretty quickly. Well, not unfortunately, but I mean, in terms of friendship. So pretty quickly, I
Yeah.
ended up meeting my wife, moving to America. He ended up, he moved out home, got a girlfriend, moved off to Norwich. And it was one of those things where we talk on the phone, every few days, then it becomes weeks, then it becomes months. And it wasn't like there was a disagreement per se, but it was just difficult because neither one of us was at home, neither one of us was seeing anybody else we knew or things we did, and it was just kind of you didn't have as much to talk about over the phones, if that makes sense.
So it wasn't one big, because I know, I think this is one of the things as you get older, you do tend to, you lose touch with people, but
Mm-hmm.
there are times where it's you have maybe a big blowout where it's just one catalyst but sometimes it just kind of naturally seems like it progresses that way. Is that what you're saying? It was that more natural progression?
Yeah, I mean, it was more natural, and then there was, I mean, there were one or two disagreements, but obviously they were so trivial in nature that I don't even remember what they were at this point, But I mean,
Yeah.
at the time, obviously, we had, disagreements about this and that. I can't think what, but something. And then, we just didn't talk. And then it was like 10 years later, I was at work one day eating lunch, funnily enough. And I got a text, well, not a text, a Facebook message from his sister, which was weird because I wasn't friends with her. So I thought it's kind of weird. She was contacting me, but okay, I'll be polite, see what she wants.
Yeah.
And he was walking down the street after watching a football match, and he had a massive heart attack and just died on the spot. And
So sorry.
it was, the I knew that by that point in time he had a kid, just because the last time we'd been in contact, we had both just had children,
Yeah.
and that was the first thing that struck me, because I was thinking at that time my daughter was like 7, and I was just thinking, oh my god, his poor kid, he's not even really going to know his dad,
Yeah.
what would that be like for him? That was the first thing that struck me. And then the second thing that struck me was, how in the hell did we just grow apart? And maybe, I mean, obviously I couldn't have made a medical difference, but somehow you kind of feel like, well, maybe the butterfly effect or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If we'd had more interaction, maybe events would happen, he would have been somewhere else and this happened, maybe he could have got saved. I mean, it doesn't really, it's not a logical thing, but in a
No.
sense I felt a kind of a responsibility, if that makes sense.
It almost feels like or sounds like kind of like an idea of like a survivor's guilt, right? But because you're right, it's not a rational, it's not a rational thing to think about, but I think it's a natural thing to just immediately go to what could I have done, even though it doesn't sound like there's anything that you would, there's nothing that you would have responsibility for, but it's still, it's just, it's where your brain goes.
Right. And then the other thing, and I listened to one of your episodes with the other English guy, and he was saying something similar.
Yeah.
Um, when it's someone young, you kind of feel, in a way, you feel a bit guilty that you're still alive and they're not. And so then you sort of think, well, I better make the most of it, because if I'm just feeling, oh, today I just feel like lazing around, not bothering to do something, not trying to pursue my dreams, I bet he would happily switch places,
Yeah.
Um, and so it kind of made me feel like I needed to. I mean, I didn't need to get my act together per se, but just try to make the best of life, enjoy experiences, enjoy company of people. Um, because obviously something that he didn't have that opportunity.
And it's, I know it's one of those, it feels whenever you're in this general age range and you hear about somebody passing, and I think it's easy to think, just you kind of put it on yourself too, as if it could happen to someone else, what does that mean for me? And there's a lot of mixed feelings that go with it, right? I think there are the feelings of guilt, or the feelings of obviously sadness. I know for me is whenever I hear about somebody in my age range passing, it's a fear too, because you mentioned, you'd both had children. I've got a child myself, and I feel like whenever you have a kid, it changes your outlook on everything. And so that's, you're, when you said that was the first place your mind went, that made perfect sense to me, because everything ties back to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's just one of those things. It's just that's the first place that my head goes. You just kind of put your kid ahead of yourself, um, and so yeah, it makes it that much worse when you hear about something like that. Um,
Yeah,
for the child. I mean, I kind of
yeah,
feel like in a way, once you've had kids, it's almost like you've already lived your life. So now it's your kid's turn. So if
yeah,
in a sense, if something's going to happen to anyone, better it to be you. But still, that's obviously terrible for the child.
yeah. It's a weird it's a weird balance because you would I know if you've seen your kids scrape their knee or just have a cold, you would in a heartbeat you would say, "I will take that for you if I could. If I could take that pain or that feeling sick, I would take that from you in a heartbeat so you don't have to experience it." You
Exactly.
know. But yeah, you still want to be there even for whenever they're going through times. You want to be there just to kind of be that reassurance or that comfort. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. I mean, it changes everything. So yeah.
Let me ask you. So, in those couple years leading up to it, had it been a while since you'd spoken? Had either one of you, throughout those years, had you tried to? I know you said that you would talk every occasionally, but
Yeah. I mean, it had been a couple of years without any kind of contact. Um, and yeah, it's one of those things too. I think you both get kind of annoyed, like, oh yeah, maybe today I feel like talking and the other person's busy.
yeah,
And then you sort of take a front, and then maybe they want to talk to you one time, and then you're busy, and they sort of take a front, and then you both kind of think, oh well, they don't want to talk to me in your own kind of selfish mindset. Whereas really, it's just like, well, you're in different time zones, different circumstances in life. If it was a matter of being convenient, yeah, but it's not always. But sometimes you kind of get it into your head, like, well, why should I make the bother? The other
yeah.
person needs to step it up, and I mean, it's stupid. It's kind of very narrow-minded, selfish kind of perspective. Um, but unfortunately, I think we both fell into that.
I think it's natural, especially over time, for that to happen. And it just when you were telling me that, the first thing that popped into my head was this saying, this we judge others. What is it? We judge others by their actions. We judge ourselves by our intent.
Right. That
You know,
perfectly describes it.
because
Absolutely.
yeah, it's because it's never a matter of it's rarely I don't want to talk to this person, but I know that feeling. It's that, well, I know we haven't spoken in a couple of days, but I'm really busy right now and I've got to take care of this and I'll call him tomorrow. But then the next day you get busy and then eventually you do talk, but then again you keep getting busy, things keep happening, you talk less frequently, and
Right.
it's one of those. As I get older, it's one of those things. It's annoying, it's frustrating. It's also it's no one's fault, and I think that's one of the things that is the most annoying about it is that it's you can't put blame on somebody to say, well, you know this person that they don't call them anymore. If I'm not calling them either, I can't get mad at them. And I this idea of, well, a phone works both ways, I think that oversimplifies it. you know
Exactly. And I also think, these days more so, but, you hear a lot about, toxic people and narcissists and all this. And I mean, I understand there are legitimately people like that. But I also
yeah,
feel there's this culture of branding every single person like that. And so when you get into that mindset, you pretty much end up not liking anyone. You know what I mean? Because you
yeah.
convince yourself like, oh, well, that was a toxic behavior because they didn't call me back in 5 minutes. And so you know, I think these days it's probably even harder for younger people in these kind of situations to, maintain friendships and stuff.
I think that makes sense. Which is the irony to me is that we have social media and the world is more connected than it's ever been, but there is this idea that it is harder to connect with people or to stay connected just because it is so much there's so much that's competing for attention. And I I don't know. I think you made a really good point too about it's easy to brand people as narcissist or uncaring, but I think very few people are easily summed up in one or two words.
Right.
I'm a firm believer that there's a lot. people aren't black and white, right? There's a lot of gray area, and it's hard to say that somebody's just pure bad, pure good. You have people, I think, that maybe fall more so on one side of the spectrum, but
Yeah,
I think it is really hard to just kind of paint with a broad brush any one person.
yeah, definitely. And I think that, like I say, a lot of times we fall into that trap because I don't know, maybe it just kind of um, maybe it's a pride thing, Maybe rather than just saying, well, maybe they have other priorities, maybe it's just easier to say, oh, maybe they're evil, you know. They
Yeah.
didn't call me back because they're the spawn of the devil, rather than just, hey, maybe they were like hanging out with their kid.
Yeah. And it's one of those things. I think pride, I think you hit on something there. I think pride is most people I think would not admit it, but pride really does drive a lot of our actions. And there is this idea you can easily feel affronted by somebody and default to, well, I'm not going to reach out now because I'm going to dig my heels in, and just out of spite I'm not going to make an effort. But I don't think that's always the case. I think that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes it's embarrassment too. And I know that I've
Yeah,
had times I was embarrassed to reach out to somebody just because it had been a while.
right. There's a kind of awkwardness.
Yeah. And the real kicker with that is, for me personally, I have a friend from high school and I've probably got, maybe on one hand I can count the amount of friends from high school I stay in touch with. And for me very much I wish no one ill from high school, but there's only a couple of people who I'm like, okay, we were close enough that I would want to, 20 years almost later, I'd want to stay in contact with them.
Mm-hmm.
um I have one though who we were really good friends. you know she was a year behind me, and we were really good friends for a couple years after high school. And somebody still, I would say I care about, but it's kind of, at this point, it's our relationship is that we text a few times during the year around our birthdays and kind of catch up on how our kids are and how our families are doing and how careers are going. And it's very much like whenever we text, it's like we've kind of fallen into this rhythm of there's no judgment that I sense from her that I'm hoping she senses from me, because it is very much we're both busy, and I think we can
Right.
both acknowledge that. And thankfully, we don't even do the thing now of the I don't know if you ever done this, the hollow that, like, oh, we really should get together sometime, you know but because there's always such an awkwardness with that, right? This,
Right.
we need to get together, and we say that every time, but we don't do it. So I kind of like how we've fallen into this pattern of, I'm going to tell you happy birthday, and I'm going to ask how the family's doing, and you're going to send me some pictures of your kids, and then I'll do the same thing. And then we kind of naturally in the conversation, and I'll talk to you again in 6 months when it's my birthday. And
Right. Yeah. So you maintain the connection, but you don't, like you said, make any hollow promises that then can jeopardize it potentially if people start getting frustrated. Like, why do you keep saying that? Because we never do. So
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, I still consider this person. If this person were to call me right now and say, "Hey, I need a favor," my first thought would be, "Okay, well, what do you need?" It wouldn't be, "Why are you calling me after all this time?" Um, and I don't know if that's just because of our personalities, or if that's because of kind of the routine that we've fallen into. But I've never stopped and thought and talked about it to the degree even that we're talking about it now.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this though. I mean, with this happening, because I mean, it sounds like clearly this was somebody who was very important to you, and meant a lot to you. Would you say, has this changed how you approach other friendships or relationships? Has this had any kind of lasting change there, or is it, do you think it's kind of unique and one off to this person and this relationship?
Um. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think it has changed it. Um. Like, I haven't really been close friends with another guy to that extent since then. To be honest, it's always been pretty superficial, just kind of work colleague type stuff. And partly that's because it's in America, so I just don't have the same background, interest,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So it makes it a little bit harder. But yeah, I never have, you know, um, been really close friends with another guy like that since then.
I will say it does feel like it feels like as you get older, it's harder to make like really deep friendship connections.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you feel this way too, but I think as a man, I think there's some of that too. It's there's kind of an inherent awkwardness, which sucks. I mean it feels like there's some weird pressure that you can't be too open as a grown man, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's like on the one hand, you get these people who are like middle-aged frat boys, and they're all like, "Right, let's
Yeah.
just get drunk and go to the strip club and play golf and that crazy." And then you get other people who are just kind of like, "Oh yeah, oh hi, how are you? Okay, bye." It's
Yeah.
kind of like you just don't,
Yeah.
there's not sort of happy medium as much.
Yeah, and I gotta say the middle aged frat boys, I know the type. I just God, for the life of me, I couldn't like that. Just sounds like a horrible weekend to me. Is just getting hammered, going to the strip club, going to play golf. Like I would much rather be with my family at home, and or just something simple, yeah, a cookout, or just
Right,
just having people over and just getting a small get together. Just the older I get, the more I realize that I don't need a bunch of wildness to
right,
have a good time.
exactly. Yeah, I mean that's just I don't know. I feel like maybe they missed out on their youth or something. I don't know, but to me, it's not my cup of tea anyway.
I'm with you. Would you say through all this, is there anything that you've learned about friendships, or that really? This might be something that you've never had to ask yourself or think about, but is there anything that you've learned through all this that if you could go back and tell your younger self, or tell somebody younger, that you would share?
Yeah, I mean, I would say um, that what I've probably learned now over time, when you sort of balance things, is on one hand, realistically, you can't control other people, and you shouldn't attempt to. And if things happen to them or they go down a certain path, you might disapprove or what have you. But I mean, that's them, that's your life. You can't control that, and so you have to just accept them as they are, or not. And then also, you have to try to be truer with yourself as well, instead of just looking at everything from your own perspective of what are your interests and wants right now. Take a step back and look at the big picture, and then if you have a more holistic view of both sides life, you'll you'll have kind of a healthier view on things. I mean, that's what I would say, because I think at the time we probably had issues because we weren't looking like that, and then afterwards it caused a lot of internal wrestling because I wasn't looking at things holistically.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, I think especially as you get older, you just I don't know if it's you learn to appreciate perspective more, or you just get more perceptive of it. But perspective is I think one of the most important things that somebody could learn, is just how to think about something from another lens, or just from somebody else's point of view. That it can be life changing when you learn to do that.
Exactly. I mean, I think to your point earlier about things being great, I mean, when I was probably like 18, I pretty much had everybody in society in black or white groups, good and bad,
Yeah,
Whereas like now I'd probably say it's 99.9% grey. And then you get that little 0.1% of complete psychos, you know.
yeah, yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I even on the flip side of the people that are that seem pure good, I mean, everybody's got something that they're not proud of or not happy, and it might be something they just beat themselves up. But you're right. That 0.1%, I think that's where you'd put your you know your wildly good or wildly bad people,
Mm-hmm.
who are clearly 100% one or the other. But I think most people fit into this gray area of kind of good, kind of bad. It just kind of depends on the day and who's looking at them. Because I think everybody. I was talking with someone about this in an episode I just recorded the other day that'll come out before this one, and it was this idea that everybody has a different perspective of you. You've got your view of yourself, but every person you've ever interacted with has a different view of you,
Yeah,
and they may be similar, but they're not all 100% the same.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, sometimes it can be quite surprising when you hear those
Yeah,
opinions. Um, it's you kind of like completely unexpected. But like you said, everyone's got their own perspective. So if that's how they see it, then you know that's just how it is. But it can be quite surprising.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I'll ask you this this last question then. If you had a chance to have one more meal with your friend,
Hmm.
you know, what would you want to have? Where would you want to go? What would you want to say to them?
um, I would want to go to Bratislava in Slovakia to that. I mean, if it still exists, that place with the endless supply of food and drink, and hopefully all the same staff work there and all the same locals are there, and
Yeah.
just talk about um, how petty and stupid we were, and not in a like a confrontational way, but just in a kind of a weren't we so stupid sort of laughing kind of way.
Yeah.
Let's just sort of enjoy this, reflect on good times, and laugh at our own, you know, failings as far as the negative times.
Oh. There's a way you can laugh with an old friend about your younger selves. It's really I don't know, really really special.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dan, is there anything else you'd like to say about your friend?
Um, no, I mean, I feel like this has been pretty good conversation actually. So, uh, yeah, I haven't really left anything uncovered other than just I do speak to his sister quite a bit now, which is I think for her too. I don't know what happened there, but apparently they had some kind of distance. So we've kind of
Yeah.
exchanged stories to kind of fill in blanks for each other, as far as um, different aspects of his life. So that has been positive. I think, especially for her, 'cause she was quite a bit younger than him, and so she really didn't know him socially per se. Um, so that's been positive, and it's been positive for me in the sense of helping her, with her grief.
That is great. I mean, especially if she didn't get to know him that same way, because it's it goes back to this idea that your view of somebody is not always the full view of them, and especially I think with like a younger sibling, because I've got two older siblings myself, and you know we were a lot younger, the relationship I had when I was a lot younger was different than whenever we were all older.
Right.
So you having that chance to kind of fill in the gaps a bit, and you know basically give her a whole nother view of him, and just help her get closer to him. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And like I say, I mean, she seems to like it, and like for me too, it just kind of it makes me feel good as far as just filling in that hole in the memory, as it were.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm glad you're able to do that for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Dan, I appreciate you coming on today and talking and sharing your story. I hope this has been helpful in some way. I hope just getting a chance to kind of talk about it's been beneficial for you. But I really appreciate you coming on to do it.
Yeah, it's been a great privilege, and I've listened to your other episodes, and I think they've been really interesting, just different kind of people and perspectives. So I think it's a good concept, and yeah, it's definitely beneficial for the participants. So I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. I really appreciate the kind words. I do always like to give people time here at the end to promote anything that you're working on. I know you write. I know you also host a podcast. Well, can you
Mhm.
promote some stuff for us?
Yeah, so on the podcast, fascinating people, fascinating places. Is deliberately broad because I pretty much just decided to kind of do episodes on anything and anyone that was of interest to me. But so, for example, I did some interviews with NASA astronauts just because they're people that I always wanted to be one when I was a kid, you know? And
Yeah.
so I was lucky enough to interview them. On the flip side of that, there's people I've interviewed not because I like in any way, but just because I'm interested. So, like here near where I am in Kansas City, there's this Westboro Baptist Church that you've probably heard of. You go around protesting funerals and stuff.
Unfortunately, I've heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to speak to them purely because I've seen them on other things like Louis Theroux's show and stuff, and I feel like people fall into the trap. Like Louis Theroux, he's not religious, so his kind of thing is, "Oh, I'm not religious. Why you mean?" And then they just throw all this scripture at him and stuff, and so they never get put in the spot of like, what's your justification religiously? Well, I
Yeah.
am religious. Um, so I wanted to kind of put it to them from the perspective of, okay, here's my understanding of the gospel. Here's my scripture at you. What do you have to say? Kind of thing, just to kind of put it at an angle of someone who's not a complete outsider saying, I don't understand the scriptural basis for what you do, you know?
Yeah.
And we had a pretty heated debate on it, and I mean, I completely disagree with them. But
Yeah.
like I say, it was something I wanted to do almost even just as like, I mean, obviously they spend a lot of time and money on this, and I feel like they're headed to the wrong place, if you will. So almost
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to like, hey, try to correct you guys if I can. I mean, obviously it didn't really work, but I mean, like there were certain things like put her on the spot with, and it seemed to kind of throw her to have someone who's actually just talking from that perspective. You know what I mean? So that was
So,
interesting.
yeah, because I can understand that, and it makes sense. I've never really thought about it that way. If you're, I guess for them, it's easy to hide behind, the Bible if they're going against somebody who's not religious and say, okay, well, you don't understand or appreciate this. But
Right.
if you've got somebody who is a believer, who is, who has studied, and you're almost approaching it from a I'm trying to think of the way I would phrase this. I mean, you're not just approaching it from let's just argue right and wrong, good and bad. I mean, but from
Right.
just from a logical standpoint of what you're saying is hateful, and it also just doesn't line up, just the words.
Right. And to be honest, what kind of made me think of it was um, after 9/11 with ISIS and all this stuff, I've seen so many news interviews with Islamic clerics and newscasters asking them like, well, what are you preaching in your churches? What are you preaching in your mosques? Why aren't you speaking out against Al Qaeda or against ISIS if you disagree with them? And you know and a lot of people do, obviously, but there's this kind of perception of, oh well, all these good Muslims aren't speaking out against the evil ones and trying to correct them. And then I was thinking, well, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm doing the same thing. If I'm technically in the same religious bracket as these people and just sitting here not saying anything. So that was I kind of felt responsible to do it. I mean, like I say, I don't imagine it will change anything, but I wanted to try at least.
That's the thing. At the end of the day, if you can say that you made an effort, I mean, I can understand that. I totally can understand that. And I do feel like people like that they've made their decision. It feels like, and dug their heels in, but you never know. You never know who could have a change of heart and just wake up one morning or just hear something or see something that makes them realize, like, I've been incredibly cruel. And
Right.
yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, you can hope you've made an effort at least.
Yeah. So like I said, I spoke to them, and then I've done other stuff. It's not as dramatic, historical stuff and things like that. But I'm bringing out a second podcast in January, which is called Kansas City Crime, and that
Okay.
is much more of a narrow focus, obviously. But I've been recording some stuff for that, and partly famous. I mean, Kansas City has a lot of crime. I mean,
Yeah.
both in the past, historically, and right now, unfortunately. But you're covering both, historic kind of stuff, but also recent. unsolved stuff, and crime in the broadest sense of not just quote unquote criminals, but criminal policing, corruption, things like that, which unfortunately we have a lot of issues with as well. So I'm also working on that at the minute.
That'll be great. Once that is released in January, let me know. I'd love to make sure to promote that here on the podcast, because that sounds like that'd be a great, interesting listen.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that.
Certainly. Well, Dan, I appreciate it. Anywhere we can find you on social media?
Yeah, on Facebook, Fascinating People, Fascinating Places, Twitter. When I set up my Twitter, I mistyped. So instead of author Dan the Man, it says author Dan the MA1. Because I put a 1 instead of an N somehow, and I couldn't change it. So, but anyway.
Hey, no worries. I'll make sure to link that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. But anyway, nice. It's been great to talk to you, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Dan, certainly. I appreciate you being on. Thank you for being here today.
All right. Cheers, man.
Take care.
Thanks again to Dan for joining and sharing his story. Please go listen to Fascinating People, Fascinating Places, wherever you listen to podcasts, and be sure to follow Dan on social media. I'm going to make sure to tag him in our episode notes. You can also follow Our Last Meal on Twitter and Instagram at OurLastMealPod, or visit at OurLastMeal.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can also reach out by clicking the Share Your Story button on the page. Finally, as I always remind you, please take time to enjoy a meal with someone you love.